They say you never hear the bullet that kills you. It's a cliché, I know, but clichés exist for a reason. They are the ghosts of repeated mistakes. In my case, I didn't just miss the sound of the bullet. I was the one who polished the gun, loaded the chamber, and handed it to the marksman. And I did it with a smile because the marksman was my brother, not by blood but by something thicker, by ambition, by survival, by 10 years of shared trenches in a war called architecture. My name is Elias. If you look up at the skyline of this city, the glass shards piercing the smog, the impossible cantilevers of the new arts district, you won't see my name on the plaques. You'll see the firm, Vanguard and Associates, and if you dig a little deeper, into the press releases and the glossy magazines, you'll see one face, Julian. Julian was the sun. I was the gravity that held his solar system together. It was a dynamic we established in our second year of university. Julian could sell a blank sheet of paper to a starving writer for $1,000. He had the jawline, the handshake, the laugh that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. But I had the math. I had the obsessive, quiet mind that understood how to make steel float. We were a perfect organism. The face and the brain. It was a Tuesday in November when the illusion began to shimmer, though I didn't recognize it as a glitch in reality at the time. We were working on the Helix, a proposal for a municipal library that was essentially going to define our careers. It wasn't just a building, it was a legacy project. $100 million contract. If we landed this, we weren't just senior partners, we were gods. It was 11:45 p.m. The office was a cavern of shadows and the hum of high-end servers. The only light came from my dual monitors and the singular lamp on Julian's desk across the open floor plan. I was rubbing eyes that felt like they were filled with sand. The wind shears were off on the north elevation. If we kept the glass facade that thin, a Category 1 storm would turn the atrium into a shrapnel grenade. Julian spun in his Herman Miller chair, tossing a stress ball against the ceiling. Catch, toss, catch. He told me to fix it, to use the composite alloy we tested in Dubai. He said he'd sell it to the board. He told me to make it look impossible because that's what they buy. They buy the magic trick. I was the magician. He was just the guy in the top hat. He walked over and rested a hand on my shoulder. Heavy, warm, reassuring. He told me I was overthinking the physics, that I always did, and that's why he loved me. He said he was heading out because Elena, his fiancée, had a crisis with a vendor for the rehearsal dinner. Elena Kincaid. She ran a boutique firm that was our direct rival for this project. They were the power couple of the industry. I was the best man in waiting. I was the guy who formatted their wedding invitations because I knew InDesign better than the stationer. I told him to go. I told him I worked better when he wasn't breathing down my neck anyway. He squeezed my shoulder, grabbed his coat, and vanished into the elevator. I was alone. I put my headphones on classical, no lyrics, Rachmaninoff, and dove into the structure. This was where I lived. In the vectors and the loads, there is a purity to structural engineering. It doesn't lie. If a beam is too weak, it fails. There is no politics in concrete. Around 2 a.m., I needed a file from the shared archive, the geotechnical survey for the building site. I navigated to our server, to the folder marked Project Helix. The folder was empty. That was odd. I knew I had uploaded the soil density reports 3 days ago. I checked the recycling bin. Nothing. I checked the version history. Moved by USER. Julian Uncher V at 10:15 p.m. He had moved them? Why? Maybe he needed them on his laptop for a meeting he hadn't told me about. But Julian didn't read geotechnical surveys. He read executive summaries. He wouldn't know a soil density chart from a stock ticker. I texted him, no reply. He was probably asleep. I found a backup on my local drive a week old, but usable and kept working. I didn't think much of it. Files get dragged and dropped by accident all the time. Clumsy fingers on a trackpad. By 6 a.m., I had solved the wind shear problem. I had created a strut system that was practically invisible, hiding the strength inside the elegance. It was brilliant. It was the kind of work that wins awards. I saved it, backed it up, and finally slept on the couch in the break room for 2 hours. When I woke up, the office was buzzing. Julian was in his office, door closed, talking animatedly on the phone. I poured a black coffee and leaned against the glass wall of his office, waiting for him to finish. He saw me, held up a finger 1 minute and turned away, lowering his voice. I'm not a paranoid man, I'm a logical man. But logic dictates that when someone turns their back to you in a glass room, they are hiding something on their face. When he finally came out, he was beaming. He asked if I cracked it. I handed him the tablet. He swiped through the renders, his eyes lighting up. He called it sexy. He said it wins us the bid. I asked him, casually, what he did with the geofiles last night. Julian froze. It was a micro-expression. Less than a second. A tightness in the corner of his eye. Then it washed away into his standard charm. He laughed, blamed his laptop sinking, said he dragged the folder by mistake. He apologized for the tech incompetence. He told me I needed to relax, that I'd been grinding for 3 months straight. He suggested I take a week at his cabin after the submission. He clapped me on the back. He said we were a team. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We had 10 years of history. We had secrets. We had success. But as I walked back to my desk, a small, cold thought lodged itself in the back of my brain. A question without an answer. If he dragged the folder by mistake, why did the server logs show he accessed it individually, file by file, and downloaded them to an external drive? I dismissed it. I told myself I was tired. I told myself that paranoia is the enemy of friendship. I didn't know then that the file wasn't lost. It was ammunition, and the war had already started. The following week was a blur of high-gloss rendering and low-level anxiety. We submitted the proposal for the Helix on Friday at noon. The deadline was strict. We hit send at 11:45 a.m. The release was physical. We went out for drinks that night. Elena met us there. She looked stunning, sharp and polished in a way that made you feel unkempt just by standing near her. She raised a martini glass to the winners. Her smile was directed at Julian, but her eyes flicked to me for a second. There was something in them. Not pity, triumph. On Monday morning, the atmosphere in the office was heavy. Julian was frantic. He called me into his office at 10 a.m. He didn't sit down. He told me we had a problem. The Planning Commission. Someone leaked a preliminary draft of our environmental impact statement. The one from 2 months ago. The one where we flagged the water table issue. My stomach dropped. That was internal. We fixed that issue. The final report showed the remediation plan. Julian snapped at me. It was the first time in years he had raised his voice. He caught himself, took a breath, and lowered his tone. He said the leak didn't include the fix. It just showed that we knew about a potential hazard. It looked like we were trying to bury it. He asked me if I sent the draft to anyone. A professor? A consultant? I stared at him. He held up his hands, claiming he was defending me to the partners, but they were asking who had access. It was basically him and me. I told him I didn't leak it, and I knew he didn't, so we had a breach. Julian looked away. He suggested maybe I left a laptop open at a coffee shop. He reminded me I was exhausted, that I'd told him I was hallucinating wind shears. I stood up. I never said I was hallucinating. I said I was tired. There is a difference. He told me to let him handle the damage control. He told me to keep my head down. I walked out of his office feeling like the floor was tilted. Did I leave a laptop open? No, I was meticulous. My security hygiene was better than the IT department's. But Julian's suggestion, the way he planted the seed of my exhaustion, it was effective. I started to doubt my own memory. 2 days later, the second blow landed. I was at a site visit for a smaller project, a residential tower uptown. I was waiting for the elevator when I saw a familiar logo on a hard hat across the street. Kincaid Architecture, Elena's firm. They were renovating the historic theater opposite our site. I watched as a site manager unrolled a set of blueprints on a makeshift table. The sun was hitting the paper just right, and I have eyes that have spent 20 years looking at lines. I saw truss design. It wasn't just a standard truss, it was my truss. 3 years ago, on a failed project in Seattle, I had developed a specific way of anchoring steel beams into masonry to avoid vibration damage. It involved a very specific, unorthodox spacing of the bolts, a 757 pattern. Most engineers use uniform spacing. I used the erratic pattern because it disrupted the harmonic resonance. It was my signature. It wasn't in any textbook. It was in my head and on my hard drive. I saw the 757 pattern on that blueprint across the street. I froze. The world went quiet. The traffic noise faded into a dull drone. Elena's firm was using my signature anchor. I crossed the street. I walked up to the foreman. I asked about the vibration dampening mount. He nodded. He said it was new tech from the boss, Elena Kincaid herself. He said she was a genius, that she came up with it last week to solve the subway rumble. Last week. I had designed that pattern 3 years ago. It was buried in my archive, in a folder called Legacy dos Correis Sets. I walked away. My hands were shaking, not a visible tremor but a deep internal vibration, like a bridge about to collapse. I went back to the office. I didn't go to my desk. I went to the server room. I needed to see the logs. I logged in as an admin, a privilege I insisted on keeping. I pulled the access logs for the Legacy ACE SES folder. Access granted user Elias M at Tuesday, 3 p.m. But last Tuesday at 30 p.m. I was in a mandatory HR training seminar. I wasn't at my desk. Someone had used my terminal, or someone had spoofed my credentials. I sat there in the cold blue light and the pieces started to drift together. The missing geo files, the leak of the environmental report, the signature truss appearing on Elena's site. Julian. It had to be. He was the only one who knew my password. I had given it to him 5 years ago when I was in the hospital with appendicitis and we needed to send a file urgently. I never changed it. Why would I? He was my brother. But why? Why give my work to Elena? They were competitors, even if they were getting married. Business is business. If she wins, we lose. If Vanguard loses, Julian loses. It didn't make sense. The math didn't add up. Unless he wasn't planning on staying at Vanguard. I pulled up the corporate directory. I looked at Julian's email outbox. I couldn't read the emails, but I could see the subjects. Dozens of emails to a private address, ekincaid@gmail.com. Subject lines, thinking of you. Dinner plans, the red folder. Vibration issue solved. Helix draft. Helix draft. Sent 2 days before our submission. He sent her our proposal. He sent her my work. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to put my head between my knees. This wasn't just theft. This was a dissection. He was stripping me for parts to build her up. But why? I went back to my desk. Julian walked by. He looked stressed, phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, he forced a smile, a tight grimace. He mouthed, "Hang in there, buddy." I stared at him. I looked at the man I had spent Christmas with, the man who held my mother's hand at her funeral. He wasn't protecting the firm. He wasn't protecting me. He was feeding me to the wolves to make sure Elena wore the pelt, but I still didn't understand the endgame. If Vanguard failed, Julian went down with the ship. I needed to know. I couldn't confront him, not yet. If I accused him now, he'd deny it. He'd say I was paranoid. He'd say the emails were personal. He was charming enough to make a jury believe the sky was green. I needed undeniable proof, and I needed to know the full extent of the rot. I saved the server logs to a USB drive. I put the drive in my pocket. That night, silence in the skyscraper felt pressurized. I sat at Julian's desk. I'd never done this before. We had boundaries, but boundaries are for friends. We were no longer friends. We were combatants. His computer was locked, obviously. But Julian was a creature of habit, and he was arrogant. Arrogance makes people sloppy. He had a physical notebook he carried everywhere, a leather-bound moleskin where he jotted down ideas. I found it in his bottom drawer, buried under a stack of architectural digests. I flipped through it. Sketches, numbers. Then, about halfway through, the tone changed. The handwriting became jagged, rushed. Oct 12, Kincaid debt unmanageable. Father threatening to cut her off if firm doesn't perform. Bailout impossible without liquidity. Oct 20, the merger. If Kincaid lands Helix, their valuation triples. Acquisition target. I stopped breathing. The merger. It wasn't just about helping his fiancée, it was a corporate coup. If Elena's firm won the Helix contract, their value would skyrocket. If Vanguard lost, our stock would dip. Julian wasn't just feeding her the work. He was engineering a scenario where Kincaid became the dominant player. I kept reading. Nav 1, Elias is the bottleneck. His work is too good. Cannot be replicated easily. Need to transfer the IP before the split. Nav 3, protection plan. If Elias fails, I look like the victim. I trusted my brilliant but unstable engineer. I exit with clean hands, join Elena as CEO of the new entity. There it was, in black ink. Elias is the bottleneck. I wasn't a person to him. I was an obstacle and a resource. He was going to frame me. He was going to use the exhaustion narrative, the leaked files, the mistakes, to paint me as incompetent or mentally unstable. He would fire me or let the board fire me, acting the heartbroken friend. Then he would jump ship to Elena's firm, taking the prestige and leaving me with a destroyed reputation. I closed the notebook. I placed it back exactly where I found it. I stood up and walked to the window. The city sprawled out below me, a grid of light and ambition. I felt small. I felt stupid. I remembered the times I had covered for him, the times I had done his work. I realized then that sociopaths don't look like monsters. They look like your best friend. They look like the guy who buys the first round. I felt a scream building in my throat. I wanted to smash his monitor. I wanted to call the partners. But I stopped. If I screamed now, I looked like the unstable engineer he was already painting me to be. If I went to the partners with a stolen notebook, he would spin it. He'd say I was jealous. He had the charm. I had the stutter when I was angry. I needed more than a notebook. I needed a smoking gun. And I needed him to pull the trigger while the world was watching. I went back to my desk. I opened the file for the Helix project, the final presentation version. The presentation was in 3 days. Julian was going to present it. But Kincaid Elena would be presenting too. If Julian had sent her our files, her presentation would look suspiciously like ours. But suspiciously like isn't proof. Architecture follows trends. She could argue convergent evolution. I needed her to present something that couldn't possibly be hers. Something that proved, mathematically and forensically, that she had the file after a certain date. I needed a trap. I looked at the structural model of the Helix, the beautiful invisible strut system I had designed. I began to work, not to improve it, but to mark it. In the digital world, there is something called a watermark. Usually, it's a visible stamp. But in 3D modeling, you can hide things in the geometry. I zoomed into the sub-basement level of the model, into the rebar of the foundation, a place no client ever looks. I arranged the rebar configuration, not in a standard grid. I arranged the steel bars to form letters. No, I was too petty. I needed something structural, something that, if removed, would crash the model. I went deeper. I altered the mathematical constants in the material library. I took the specific gravity of the concrete and changed it by 0.01%, a tiny fraction, invisible to the naked eye. But if you ran the stress test simulation, the one the city engineers would run after the bid was won, the building would show a critical failure on the 40th floor. It was a poison pill. If Julian presented this model and we won, the building would be flagged as unsafe during the review. I would be blamed. But if Elena presented this model, if Elena presented a model that contained my 0% error, an error I had just introduced tonight, it would prove she had downloaded my file tonight, or tomorrow morning. I needed to make sure Julian sent her the new file, the one with the poison pill. I drafted an email to Julian. Subject, you are Jeant. Helix optimization. Julian, I had a breakthrough. I found a way to shave 15% off the steel budget by tweaking the alloy mix in the columns. I've updated the master file. It's cleaner, cheaper, and guarantees the win. Make sure you use the version marked Final OV2 for the presentation. This is the game changer. I attached the file with the poison pill. I sent it. Now, I had to wait. If Julian was loyal, he would keep the file internal. We would present it. We would win. And then, before the city review, I would discover the error and fix it. But if Julian was a traitor, he would see 15% budget reduction and his eyes would turn to dollar signs. He would send it to Elena immediately. Because if Elena could promise the same building for 15% less, she would win. And he wanted her to win. I sat back in my chair. The sun was starting to rise over the city. I felt hollowed out. I had just baited a trap for my best friend. Part of me was praying desperately, praying that he wouldn't take the bait, that he would just say, "Great work, Elias," and present it himself. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to be paranoid. I packed my bag and walked out of the building. I didn't sleep. I sat in the diner across the street and watched the entrance of Vanguard and Associates. At 8:30 a.m., Julian walked in. He looked fresh, rested, happy. At 8:45 a.m., I got a text. "Julian, you're a wizard, Elias. 15% is huge. I'm locking it in. Take the day off. You earned it. Take the day off. You earned it. Take the day off." He wanted me out of the office. At 9 a.m., my phone pinged with a notification from the server. File Helix Ish Final IC Bile Ish 2 downloaded by user Julian Ish V. Okay, he has it. 10 minutes later, File Helix File Vero V2 uploaded to external cloud link. He sent it. He took the bait. The betrayal wasn't partial anymore. It was total. He had just handed his fiancée the weapon to kill his own firm, and he had used my genius to do it. I didn't cry. The time for emotion had passed. Now was the time for physics. Action. Reaction. I paid for my coffee. I had 3 days until the presentation. 3 days to practice my silence. The next 3 days were a masterclass in dissociation. I came into the office. I sat at my desk. I nodded when spoken to. Julian was in high spirits. He was practically vibrating with energy. He treated me with a condescending tenderness, like one treats a sick pet that is about to be put down. He asked if I was looking forward to the break. He said I needed the sea air to clear out the cobwebs. He was already writing my obituary. I watched him. I watched him text Elena during meetings. I watched him dismiss the concerns of the junior staff. He was so confident. He thought he had pulled off the perfect crime. He thought I was the stupid, loyal dog. He didn't know the dog had rabies. I spend my time documenting everything. I didn't use the company server anymore. I used a personal drive, encrypted. I recorded the times he left the office. I saved the metadata of the files. But the real work was internal. I had to prepare for the meeting. The client was the city council and a private development consortium. The stakes were public. The presentation was open to the board of directors of both firms. I knew exactly how the meeting would go. Kincaid Architecture was presenting first, then Vanguard. This order was crucial. If Elena went first, she would present the optimized Design My Design. She would tout the 15% savings. She would wow the board. Then Julian would stand up. And he would present. What? If he presented the same design, he would look like he copied her. But he wouldn't do that. I realized with a jolt what his plan was. He wasn't going to present the optimized design. He was going to present the old design, the expensive one. He would let Elena present the 15% cheaper version. Then he would present the standard version. The client would compare them. Vanguard is 15% more expensive for the same aesthetic? Elena wins. Julian throws up his hands. We couldn't get the costs down. Elias tried, but he would blame me for the bloated budget. He would lose on purpose. It was diabolical. Thursday night, the night before the presentation. I was in my apartment. My suit was hanging on the door. It was a cheap suit, ill-fitting. Julian always told me I needed a tailor. I sat on my floor, surrounded by printed emails and logs. I had to decide how to play the reveal. I could interrupt Elena. No, that looks desperate. I could interrupt Julian. No, that looks insubordinate. I had to wait until the question and answer session. I rehearsed my lines. I had to be calm. No anger. Anger makes you look irrational. Facts make you look dangerous. Friday morning. The boardroom was on the 50th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A long mahogany table that cost more than my education. The city council members were there. The developers. Elena was there. She wore a white power suit. She looked like a shark in human skin. She smiled at Julian. A quick, conspiratorial tightening of the lips. Julian sat at the head of the vanguard side. I sat 3 seats down. The lead councilman began the meeting. Kincaid Architecture had the floor. Elena stood up. She connected her laptop. She began her pitch. We believe that the Helix should not just be a library. It should be an ecosystem. She clicked the remote. The screen filled with the render. My render. Oh. She had changed the color palette. She had added some trees. But the geometry? The invisible strut system? The way the light hit the atrium? It was mine. I felt a phantom limb sensation. That was my mind on the screen, being sold by a woman who looked at me like I was furniture. And here is the breakthrough, Elena said, smiling. We have developed a proprietary structural alloy mix that allows us to reduce steel consumption by 15%. This brings the project significantly under budget. The council members murmured in approval. 15% was millions of dollars. Julian nodded, looking impressed. He was acting his heart out. Innovative, he said, loud enough for the room to hear. Very impressive, Elena. I sat still. My hands were folded on the table. She went through the technical slides. She showed the stress loads. And then, she showed the foundation. She didn't know. She didn't know about the poison pill. She was displaying the data visualizations that were based on my corrupted material library. She finished to applause. Any questions? The room was silent for a moment. I have a question, I said. The room turned. Julian stiffened. He shot me a look. Shut up. Elias, he warned, we should save questions for the end. It's a technical clarification, I said, standing up. I didn't look at Julian. I looked at Elena. Ms. Kincaid, that alloy mix, the 15% reduction. Can you explain the specific gravity coefficient you used for the core concrete? Elena didn't blink. She was a pro. It's a standard high-density mix optimized for the strut load. Standard? I asked. So 2.4 grams per cubic centimeter? Approximately, she said, dismissive. Because, I continued, my voice level, if you look at the stress graph on slide 14, the shear force at the 40th floor junction is calculating a resistance based on a specific gravity of 2.399. The room went quiet. The engineers in the room frowned. 2.99 was a weird number. That's a negligible difference, Elena said, her smile faltering slightly. It is, I agreed. Unless it's a marker. Oh, what? The councilman asked. I turned to the screen. Can you zoom in on the rebar layout in the sub-basement? Slide 18. Elena hesitated. I don't see how this is relevant. Please, the councilman said. Humor him. Elena clicked to slide 18. Zoom in, I said. Bottom left corner. She zoomed. The rebar mesh was visible. Do you see the spacing? I asked. It's not a grid. The room squinted. It spells a date, I said. October 14th. My mother's birthday. A pin could have dropped and shattered the floor. I designed that foundation, I said, speaking to the councilman now. I designed that strut system. And I embedded a mathematical error specific gravity of 2.399 into the material library 2 days ago to test a theory. I turned to Julian. His face was gray. The blood had drained out of him so fast he looked like a wax figure. I created that file on Tuesday, I said. I sent it to Julian on Wednesday morning. I never published it. I never shared it with anyone else. I looked back at Elena. So I'm curious, Miss Kincaid. How did a file I created 48 hours ago, which exists only on my private drive and Julian's inbox, end up in your proprietary presentation? The silence wasn't pressurized anymore. It was explosive. Elena looked at Julian. Her eyes were wide, panicked. Julian stood up. Elias, this is absurd. You must have. I have the server logs, I said, pulling the USB drive from my pocket. Timestamps, download history, and the email where I sent the bait file to you, Julian. The file with the error that is currently on the screen. I placed the USB drive on the mahogany table. It made a small clack. The 15% savings isn't real, I said to the council. It's a glitch I manufactured to track a leak. If you build this building based on these numbers, it will collapse. I sat down. I didn't need to shout. The building had already collapsed. It just wasn't the one made of glass and steel. The chaos was immediate, but it was the professional kind of chaos. No one threw chairs. People just started typing furiously on phones. The councilman stood up and suspended the meeting. Elena was closing her laptop, her hands trembling. She hissed something at Julian. Julian wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. His expression wasn't anger. It was shock. He had never seen me fight back. He had spent 10 years thinking I was a tool, a hammer he could swing. He never imagined the hammer would swing itself. Elias, he said, his voice cracked. Can we talk in the hall? No, said Mr. Sterling, the senior partner of Vanguard. He had been sitting in the back. He stood up now. We will talk in my office. Julian, now. Julian looked at me one last time. He tried to summon the charm. He tried to smile. Buddy, you don't understand. I understand the physics, Julian, I said softly. Action, reaction. He was led away. Elena packed her bag and fled. The Kincaid team looked like they wanted to dissolve into the carpet. I remained seated at the table. I watched the dust motes dancing in the light from the window. 10 minutes later, Mr. Mactus. Sterling came back. He looked tired. He asked if the logs were true. I said yes. He asked if the building was unsafe. I told him the 15% savings version was the trap, but the original design was sound. He nodded. He picked up the USB drive. He told me I saved them from a massive lawsuit. He told me that Julian was going to throw the bid. I said I knew. Elias, Sterling said, this is a disaster for the firm's reputation. But you handled this with extreme prejudice. I protected my work, I said, and I protected the public's safety. He told me to take the week off. I walked out of the boardroom. I went to my desk. I started packing a box. Julian's office was dark. His coat was still on the chair. His coffee cup was still on the desk, half full. The steam was gone. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt a deep, aching exhaustion. As I walked to the elevator with my box, the elevator doors opened. Julian was there. He had been fired, escorted out. He was holding a box too. We stood there, two men with boxes in the lobby of the building we had planned to conquer together. Why didn't you just tell me? He asked. He looked broken. The shine was gone. That you knew. We could have. We could have worked something out. I could have cut you in. I stared at him. He still didn't get it. You weren't protecting me, Julian, I said. You were selling me. It's just business, Elias. It's just money. It's my name, I said. It's the only thing I have. You ruined me, he whispered. Elena, she's going to leave me. Kincaid is done. The board will sue us for corporate espionage. You ruined yourself, I said. I just turned on the lights. I stepped into the elevator. He made a move to follow. No, I said. I hit the button for the lobby. Take the next one. The doors closed. I watched his face disappear. The face of my brother. The face of the enemy. As the elevator descended, I felt the gravity. It pulled at my stomach. I had won. But as I walked out into the bright, noisy street, I realized the cost. I was alone. The team was gone. The duo was dead. I hailed a cab. The driver asked where to. I told him the coast, just drive toward the water. The fallout was swift and brutal. Vanguard and Associates sued Julian and Elena. The story hit the trade papers, then the city papers. Kincaid Architecture filed for bankruptcy 3 months later. Their reputation was radioactive. No one wants to hire an architect who steals designs that might collapse. Julian tried to call me a few times. I blocked the number. I heard he moved to Dubai, trying to start over in a market where names can be bought. Elena didn't go with him. The engagement ended the day the lawsuit was filed. Love is strong, but self-preservation is stronger. As for me, I stayed at Vanguard. They offered me a partnership, equity, the corner office, Julian's office. I took it, not because I wanted the status, but because I wanted the control. I wanted to make sure that the work, the actual work, was protected. But the office felt different. The laughter was gone. The trust was gone. I hired a new face, a young guy, charismatic, good with clients. He reminded me of Julian, but I never gave him my passwords. I never let him touch the raw data. I checked the logs every night. I became what Julian said I was, the bottleneck, the paranoid genius in the glass tower. 6 months later, the helix broke ground. I stood at the construction site, watching the pile drivers hammer the steel into the earth. I saw the rebar going in, the specific, chaotic pattern of the 757 layout. My signature. It held. It was strong. A young engineer walked up to me. She was holding a tablet. She told me the structure was performing better than the simulations. She asked how I came up with it. I looked at the skeleton of the building rising against the gray sky. I had a partner, I said. He taught me that you have to account for every force, even the ones you can't see, especially the ones you trust. She nodded, not really understanding, and called it a masterpiece. It's a fortress, I corrected. I walked away from the site. The wind was cold. It cut through my coat. I missed him. I missed the easy laughter. I missed the feeling of having someone watch my back. But then I remembered the notebook. Elias is the bottleneck. I stopped on the corner. I looked at my reflection in a shop window. I looked tired. I looked older. But I looked solid. I had cut off the rot. I had saved the building. I had lost my best friend, but I had found my reality. And reality, unlike an illusion, can bear the weight.